kick off this event with my introductory remarks. Good morning, and thank you for joining this quarterly Michigan Alliance for Greater Mobility Advancement MAGMA Advisory Council meeting. I'm Michelle Economo-Uresti, the Executive Director at the Workforce Intelligence Network and convener for the MAGMA Governing Board, which is comprised of automotive OEMs, manufacturing Tier 1 suppliers, and industry stakeholder groups. MAGMA is leading the recently awarded State of Michigan Sector Strategies EV Jobs Academy Employer-Led Collaborative. On behalf of the MAGMA Governing Board, I would like to thank and welcome our panel of speakers and moderator on this topic of clean energy. Our esteemed moderator is Milena Marcoux, a manager of customer marketing for DTE, a Detroit-based diversified energy company involved in the development and management of energy-related businesses and services. Milena currently leads the strategy and execution of DTE Electric's Charging Forward, a $30 million program that promotes EV education, infrastructure, and adoption. In her role, Milena is responsible for working with the Southeast Michigan residents, communities, businesses, and local governmental agencies to support their journey to transportation electrification and sustainability plans by activating partnerships that leverage program offerings for residential charger rebates, infrastructure incentives, and fleet advisory services. Prior to joining DTE in April 2015, Milena was a controller leading the finance team at a property management company. She holds a bachelor's degree in business administration with a concentration in finance from Davenport University and an MS in accountancy from Walsh College. Thank you for being with us, Milena, and please begin by introducing our next speaker.
Thanks, Michelle, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I am your moderator today. So happy to be here since it's the perfect time and venue to talk about best practices we can take on action today towards sustainability and a future with clean energy. Before I introduce our first panelist for the day, I want to thank MAGMA and all the planning team for putting events like this together, especially on a Friday morning, so helping us all end the week on a high note. So kicking off the speaking event today, our first speaker is Brett Steudle, who will highlight some of the work DTE is doing to build the grid of the future and accommodate EV growth. Brett is a senior strategist with DTE, currently leading the strategy and operations efforts for our Charging Forward program. And beyond encouraging electric vehicle education and adoption, the Charging Forward program is designed to help fuel EV charger infrastructure growth in Michigan by offering incentives and rebates to Michigan residents and businesses. In his role, Brett is responsible for working with residential and business customers as they plan the installation of their electric vehicle chargers. Prior to joining DTE in April of 2019, Brett was a financial controller at Masco Cabinetry Cabinet Manufacturing Company. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan and an MBA from Oakland University with a concentration in finance. Brett, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Milena, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here and go through a quick presentation as I discuss what DTE is doing with the grid of the future, as we call it, and then kind of what our efforts are specifically in the electrification space. So just kind of jumping into it, DTE is really committed to three core, delivering for three core pillars as we see them: our team, our customers, and our communities. We think that if you just are focused on one or two of these, you're gonna kind of miss the boat, especially when you're talking about an energy provider that is really the lifeblood for a lot of people. in today's world, and a critical piece of their infrastructure. There's been an incredible amount of momentum in the electrification space. I'm sure everyone is aware of that. Probably every week there's a new announcement on new carbon reduction goals or new battery plants going in for electric vehicles, something along those lines. And we're seeing this across the country as well as in Michigan, with the state economy-wide goal of reducing 28% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. A huge number of EV vehicle models coming to market here in the next few years, which really will get into different segments of the vehicle market that customers haven't had access today, such as crossover SUVs and SUVs, which are two huge segments that sell in the vehicle market overall, but really haven't been tapped into in the EV space today. And then when we have looked at rooftop solar, we've actually seen a surprisingly high number. About 20% of Michigan homeowners that install the rooftop solar end up pairing it with a battery, which is great. It allows you to take advantage of solar on a more 24/7 cycle rather than just being able to use it when the sun is out during the day. But for the grid of the future that I mentioned, just kind of want to take a step back and think through the legacy grid and kind of how that was set up to support the community. So traditionally powered by coal and gas, in a very one-directional manner from the site where that power was being generated through the transmission and distribution systems to homes and businesses. Very centralized control and energy managed, and then really focused on most people being at work during the day, as working in the office 5 days a week, pre-COVID life that we were all used to. And then you kind of flip forward to today and into the future. It's just going to be an increasingly high number of renewable power generation. There's going to be bidirectional energy flow, whether it's through batteries or vehicles, back to the grid to support resiliency and reliability. It's going to really be more decentralized than it has been in the past, as instead of having a few coal power plants that are powering the entire grid, there's going to be wind farms and solar fields all across the state and the country, as well as different areas for storage as well. So just a very decentralized setup. And then as I kind of mentioned with we used to focus on customers being at work 5 days a week. Now we've seen a huge shift to either full remote or quite a bit of hybrid, where there's a lot more load and demand on residential transformers and circuits than there used to be in the past. So dealing with that as we kind of gear up for the electrification advancements in building electrification and EVs, kind of making sure all of those things are being realized as critical components going forward. And then finally, the interconnection to utility scale renewables at the sub-transmission level will help us to increase really the efficiency of adopting these renewables. And by moving in this direction to a more modern grid, we're really going to empower customers to manage their own energy needs. We're going to support customers' goals as well as DTEs, decarbonization goals, as we get off of coal and natural gas into the future. Be able to integrate distributed energy resources and mitigate distribution grid constraints. So we're really excited as this grid of the future is being built, and as part of it, there's going to be a lot of investment that is needed to get us there. Some of you may have seen in the last few weeks, DTE actually released what we call an integrated resource plan. So it's a 20-year look into the future of what DTE is planning to do. And so this slide really kind of highlights the next 10 years in spend, just to show kind of the scale of what we're talking about here, going from about $18 billion over the next 5 years to over $40 billion by the end of the decade. Really focused on building kind of what I was talking about with utility scale storage and renewables to decarbonize the grid and get the grid prepared for an electrified future. So we're planning on having enough Michigan-made solar and wind energy to power about 4 million homes over the next 15 to 20 years. We'll also be adding 2 gigawatts of storage during that time frame, which is a huge increase from what we have on the grid today, and will allow us to increase reliability as well as better integrate those renewable assets so that we can utilize them more going forward. We're going to be investing $9 billion into the Michigan economy over the next 10 years, which will support about 25,000 jobs. So going back to that very first slide, the communities piece of this is really big for DTE. We're a Michigan company, and we really want to support Michigan businesses and make Michigan and Southeast Michigan thrive from an economic standpoint, because it's going to be good for everybody. And being the utility that serves this area, I think it's a really important mission. And then by 2035, we're planning to achieve about 85% emissions reductions from the 2005 baseline, which is a acceleration from where we were at just a couple of years ago. I think that number was around 2040 to get to 85%. So we're excited. We're still on track to be at completely 100% emissions reduction by 2050, and we're also going to be doing this by repurposing one of our coal plants into a cleaner natural gas plant for kind of an interim solution, just to help us get towards the reduction faster, because it's a lot less expensive to repurpose that plant, make it natural gas for some period of time, and then finally get to the 100% emissions reduction by the 2050 timeframe. And then just to kind of point out a couple of initiatives that DTE is doing in the clean energy space. As I mentioned, we did accelerate the retirement of our remaining coal plants, with the Monroe coal plant being the last one that will be retired in the 2035 timeframe. Some of you may have seen a couple of months ago, we made an announcement. It was the largest renewable energy purchased from a utility in U.S. history through a partnership with Ford, and that will be installed by 2025. So we're really excited about that, not just from a DTE perspective to be able to add that resource onto the grid, but to have companies like Ford Motor Company coming along on that journey with us is really exciting. Our My Green Power program, which is one of the country's largest voluntary renewables programs. So we give this to, or we offer this to residential and commercial customers. And currently we've subscribed 1.7 megawatts or gigawatts of renewables through this program. So it's a voluntary program. If anyone is interested on the call that wants to sign up for it, it's very simple and easy. If you just Google My Green Power, it's a pretty simple process to get signed up for it. And then getting into the EV space a little bit, some people might think that it is a little odd for a utility to be putting programs into the EV space and spending money on it, but we really think that there are 4 key pillars that DTE should stand on in terms of how we play a role in the electrification, especially of the transportation industry. So reducing barriers to EV adoption, we look at this twofold. So we offer incentives to customers, so financial incentives, residential and commercial customers to install chargers, and we just to bring down the upfront cost for those customers that are looking to get into an electric vehicle. And then a big component of what we do is a lot of education and outreach. There are huge gaps in knowledge of what EVs are, what the technology does, if it will work in your everyday life. So we do a lot of listening to customers. We do surveys, we do outreach campaigns to really understand where the disconnects are, and then try and address that through different marketing and education tactics that we can just try and alleviate some of that, the misconceptions that come along with EVs. And then the second one there is efficiently integrating the EV load with the grid. This is one of the primary things that we are really focused on is, as all this electrification comes, that all of this cost that's going to go into upgrading the grid is going to be done as efficiently as possible. So what that looks like in term, just a very simple example is, how do we get a person who lives in a residential neighborhood that adopts an EV to charge that EV at a time that is the most beneficial to the grid, meaning that you're charging it at a time where we're not at a peak demand. It's not 95 degrees on an August day and everyone's air conditioners are running at the same time. How do we get that EV to charge overnight when we have excess capacity on the grid, and there's not going to be an immediate need to do grid upgrades or put in additional infrastructure to support the electrification. Third one there, enable equitable access to EVs. Again, a utility is kind of uniquely suited to help with this barrier, just in the fact that the private market is going to go initially where the business case takes them, and that makes total sense. But a utility is in a unique situation to be able to really look at this holistically and make sure that nobody's left behind in this transformation as it goes forward with not just EVs, but with building electrification and other electrification needs as well. And then finally, piloting new technologies so that we can be prepared for all of the adoption that's going to be coming. And quickly, just to kind of wrap up here, the Charging Forward program has been up and running for about 3.5 years. The graphic on the left here just kind of shows, as of September, we track a ton of data for all of the incentives that we have given out for residential and commercial chargers. Some big ones here are the chargers that we have incentivized have allowed vehicles to travel 16.5 million miles in the 3 years since the program has been up. And really the bulk of that is really in the last year. The trajectory of the program is kind of growing with the EV market, which is really at the beginning of that hockey stick. Just for a little bit of context, we've seen in 2021, there were more EV sales than there had been in the previous 3 years of sales in the state of Michigan. And then this year, we're already at a 50% increase over last year. So we are really starting to see EV sales take off in the state, and specifically in Southeast Michigan, where a lot of the auto employees live and are able to get kind of those leased vehicles on a more prioritized basis. And on the right, just kind of wanted to point out that as of about a month ago, DTE had been approved for about $28 million of funding to do education outreach and rebates for customers. And then a few weeks ago, we actually got approved for an additional 17 million, which we're really excited about because we're going to be venturing into some new spaces, specifically really helping streamline the process for customers to install home chargers. It's a huge, complex, and costly process today, and we think that DTE can help put in a turnkey solution, add a fee to a customer's electric bill, and in kind of an easy payment system rather than you having to pay for that charger installation up front. And then one other thing, just to point out, that we're actually looking into the mass transit and school bus space, where we're going to help those agencies offset the cost of the battery on the electric buses that they're looking to purchase, kind of through a same thing where they will pay DTE back over the course of time for helping to finance those batteries, which will help accelerate adoption in those spaces, which is great because those are some of the highest polluters and emitters that we see. And both of those programs we're really excited about is because there's actually going to be no pressure on rates for the rest of customers. It's going to be all funded by the participants that are looking to enroll in those programs. So we're excited. There's a lot going on in the EV space that DT is involved with. And I'm going to kind of end my presentation there and pass it back to Milena, but happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you, Brett. That was a great presentation highlighting the key steps DTE is taking to accelerate the journey to the clean energy transition. I wanted to note for the audience that I'm seeing questions come through. We will hold the questions until we hear from all of the speakers. In the meantime, please continue to put your questions in the chat so we can queue them for the panel Q&A portion of the agenda. Our next speaker is Dr. Kristen Cetin, who will present on industrial assessments. I'm going to read her bio. She is the director of the Michigan State University Industrial Assessment Center, the IAC. She's also an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Michigan State University. The IAC team serves the state of Michigan and surrounding areas and is a collaboration between MSU, Michigan Tech, and the Henry Ford College. The center strives to save energy, improve productivity, and reduce waste by providing no-cost technical assessments for small manufacturing and commercial buildings across the state of Michigan. Dr. Kristen, please take it away.
All right, so thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today to give this presentation. As was stated a moment ago, I'm going to try to provide some insights that we've seen from conducting assessments throughout the state of Michigan focused on energy efficiency and decarbonization with manufacturers. We also do some commercial buildings as well, but I'll try to focus on the manufacturing side. And also provide a bit of insight on the workforce development side of this as well. So with that, I'll get started. All right, so a brief background about the Industrial Assessment Center program. This was one of the longest standing programs within the Department of Energy. It was started in the 1970s and it's been around since then. The program is based at universities throughout the country. As you can see here, we are the main assessment center within the state of Michigan. However, there's 37 total centers currently, soon to be more with the infrastructure bill funding. And they're geographically spaced to support manufacturing throughout the country. And the other important component here is that we are part of a larger network of different programs supported through the Department of Energy. The Industrial Assessment Center works with many of these programs, particularly the Better Plants program, the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, and the CHP TAP to support in providing resources and information and technical assistance for manufacturing throughout the country. The Industrial Assessment Center program on the manufacturing side generally focuses more on smaller manufacturers. However, we do work with the Better Plants program, who provides kind of support for the larger manufacturing space. So with two main goals, so I'll cover those briefly because they relate to some of the insights we've seen from conducting these assessments. The first is to support manufacturing and commercial buildings throughout, in our case, the state of Michigan. Each center, our center included, conducts about 20 industrial assessments per year. In our case, there's 9 centers that support commercial building pilot program as well. So we conduct about 10 of those per year. And again, the focus is on supporting efficiency improvements, decarbonization, waste reduction, and generally just ideas of how energy improvements can be made in the places that we work with. The target in terms of metrics, we have some pre-qualification requirements that the Department of Energy imposes. Not all of these are set in stone, but generally this is the guidance that we need to follow. So some energy bill requirements of 3 3.5 million or less per site, not in total for the company, but for the particular plant that we work with. Annual sales of less than 100 million, less than 500 employees per plant for the industrial side. And then commercial side, because this is a pilot program, we generally focus on buildings that are 100,000 square feet or less, but no other minimum requirements. The other side of the focus is on workforce development. So we train, each center trains about 10 to 20 Maine students per year, though many of us have broader reach than that through courses and other training programs outside of the key components. But the students generally are trained to support all components or all aspects of energy assessments, from the recruitment and working with companies and intake to conducting the assessments to developing and completing the reports. So the idea is that at the end of this, the students have hands-on experience and knowledge they can then take to go work in the manufacturing or energy space once they graduate. So this past year, we trained about 20 students throughout the different Michigan State, Michigan Tech, and Henry Ford. And that's fairly typical of the assessment centers in general. Another key focus, particularly in the past 5 years or so, has been on diversity and inclusion, or DEI goals. So we try to support as best we can communities and manufacturers and businesses that are considered disadvantaged. Similar with students, encourage diverse students and participation throughout the assessment process and within the training program. Just a bit about how, more than national, at the local level, how we operate. We're based at Michigan State, but we collaborate with Michigan Tech to support manufacturing in the northern part of the state of Michigan. We collaborate with Henry Ford College, mostly to support the commercial building side. So this past year, we completed 30 assessments. We're nearly done with the last one. And so you can see the geographic distribution of where we've done assessments. Several outside of the state of Michigan and northern Indiana, but in general, mostly focused on central and southern Michigan. So I guess give some brief insight or brief understanding of the assessment process, because the insights and some of the data I'll show in a minute here relate to some of these components. So on the recruiting side, when we're looking for companies that are interested in collaboration, we get referrals and information about these companies that are interested, or emails from them for a variety of different resources and collaborations throughout the state of Michigan. Work closely with the Extension Partnership at MSU, as well as several other organizations. In terms of the assessment process, this generally includes a pre-assessment meeting to best understand the components or the main energy consuming systems in a site. And then we try to get as much information and ideas prior to the assessment as possible, so that we can take advantage of the time we have on site to collect as much data and information as we can. So the assessment is generally a one-day assessment focused on the major energy consuming systems to identify those potential recommendations that can be made. Post-assessment, we have about 60 days to complete the report that gets reviewed within the IAC program. It's also, the results are provided anonymously into a publicly available database, so that we can track what kind of assessment recommendations have been made and implemented throughout the IAC program. So the report generally includes what those assessment recommendations are, generally focused on assessment recommendations that are a 5-year payback period or less. And there's some other information in it as well, utility bill analysis, again, just to try to provide as much information, calculations, detailed information as possible to make it actionable to support efficiency and decarbonization efforts within the company. So what I'm going to do in the next part of this is provide some of those insights based on the data that's been collected over the past many years throughout the Industrial Assessment Center program, and then also within our program specific to the state of Michigan. So what kinds of things are we seeing here in terms of recommendations? So we can look first at the national level. Historically, since 1981, which is when the first assessment documentation was included in the database. So it's been over 20,000 assessments, so quite a rich set of information here. And you can see on the right-hand side the locations where these have occurred. And in general, the level of savings identified with a 5-year payback period or less is about 130, 140,000. And 8% energy use reduction on average. In terms of implementation, this is also tracked. So within a year, approximately, of conducting the assessment, we follow up with the companies we work with to identify what has been implemented and what hasn't, and that's all tracked again and included as a part of the database collection. So on average, a portion of the recommendations are implemented, about 45,000 in average on savings, again, with quite a spread in terms of what's implemented and what's not. Within the state of Michigan, the first assessments within the state of Michigan were conducted in 1992, so pulled the data for that since that time. So there have been over or close to 600 assessments within the state of Michigan, with the average recommended savings similar to that of the national level, 125,000, and similar level of energy reduction. The level of implementation is also similar statewide to the national level, about 40% of that, and we continue to track that as we do assessments. So one thing that we ask or we talk to with the companies we work with is to try to understand what the motivations for identifying potential savings and recommendations could be. So this is data for the past year, where we've asked what are the main motivational factors for completing an assessment, try to identify efficiency improvements. And the main goals have primarily been energy reduction, generation of new ideas. Often, we get comments that they ran out of ideas or we can't figure out what to do next. So they need some new people to come in and look at the systems and provide some more objective information. We also hear a lot about climate action goals or a push or interest in that to support that either now or in the future for the companies. We also ask what's been done so far, because this gives us some insight on, where has there already been interest and where's the focus next. So the large majority, or maybe not majority, but many of the companies that we work with have done LED lighting retrofits. Something we've seen the past year. Is a fairly common implementation, either in part or in whole for the sites we work with. Some places that do compressed air leak studies on a regular basis or semi-regular basis. Some that have lighting occupancy sensors or timers. Some replacement of HVAC equipment, and VFD type implementation for various different motors or compressed air. There's many others as well, but these are some of the main ones. We also ask what the goal in terms of payback period is. Often this aligns with what the Department of Energy prefers for the assessment process, which is a 5-year payback period or less. But we generally see most places we work with have a preference of something that's obviously lower in years than not, but up to 5 years or so is often acceptable depending on the situation. All right, so those are some of the motivational factors and things that have been done. Now I'll just talk a bit about what kinds of things are commonly recommended or identified as opportunities for improvement and what's been implemented. So this is at the national level. Do that first and then focus on Michigan after that. So at the national level, looking for the past 2 years, the most common recommendations made remain to be LED lighting retrofits and compressed air leak identification and improvements. Often these have very high implementation rates and also fairly low in terms of payback period. So those are the most common ones: VFDs, occupancy sensors, and the compressed air, reducing the pressure in the compressed air operation so that there's less loss there, are also common. Within the state of Michigan, over the past 10 years or so, common recommendations that have been identified, again, are compressed air leaks and LED lighting, so similar to the national level, putting in outdoor intakes to provide cooler air for compressed air systems, and waste heat recovery in various different systems. As I said, we also track the implementation of some of these recommendations, and here different from the previous one of what was recommended. This is what's most commonly implemented. So compressed air leaks obviously has a fairly low cost to do so. So that's one of the most commonly implemented among the recommendations made. Adjusting when batteries or, for example, for forklifts are being charged to off-peak periods. Turning off this is a general one, but turning off equipment when not in use would be things that, maybe there's idle times where equipment can be turned off. LED lighting, occupancy sensors. So those are some of the common types of recommendations. What I wanted to mention here before talking about the few insights on the workforce development side is, as a part of this, the IEC program, but also other DOE programs, CHP TAP included, there is a notice of intent out as of this week related to implementation grants associated with recommendations identified as a part of the assessment center programs. So this funding, we were told, will start in January, December, January of this year, or this coming year. And it'll be a matching grant program targeting large commercial building or large building energy efficiency retrofits, so capital improvement type projects. More information will be available about this in the near future. So encourage everyone to keep an eye out for that in case there's opportunities for this program. The last few slides here just talk briefly about workforce development. We do ask about workforce development challenges as well. This was from our recent presentation that we gave. We asked participants to provide examples of what their challenges are that they're seeing on the energy workforce development side so that we can help to try to address those. And this shows in decreasing order what people have identified as the main energy challenges and recruiting talent to support this. So the main target and main challenge or concern is on awareness side. But I'll provide a few insights for each of these here. So on the awareness side, this is by far the most common challenge that's been identified. Generally, people are not aware that there's opportunities in the energy space for careers. And so there's some need and opportunity to help support that. The second is training, either updating existing employees to better understand energy systems or decarbonization type efforts, or organizing the right tools or organizations to have that workforce development in place to support training. And then the other two I'll talk about just briefly. Career pathways, something that many people identified as well. There's a discontinuous availability of career pathways from the K through 12 space up to careers once they graduate. So there's some opportunities there. And then DEI is also identified as something that's a challenge, just encouraging either disadvantaged communities or people from historically marginalized communities to participate in energy workforce. And so these are some of the things that we've heard recently from stakeholders, and something that we will strive to help support in various ways, not only within our program, but with others as well. So with that, I will pass it back off. I hope this was informative.
Yes, thank you for this insightful presentation. I certainly learned a lot today on some of the pieces of the assessment process that can help commercial buildings reduce waste and thus, try to make an impact, right, as we look at the future of sustainability efforts. So looking forward to the Q&A panelist portion where we'll delve some more on this important topic. So our next, but certainly not least speaker is Sarah Crane. She will be covering the topic of clean energy technologies in process efficiency and fuel switching for high heat processes. Sarah is the research manager at University of Michigan's Economic Growth Institute. Her research focuses on equitable economic growth in communities, businesses, and the workforce. She utilizes economic impact modeling to assist communities and companies to understand effects of current or proposed activities. Her qualitative research evaluates best practices of equitable economic growth, including in clean energy adoption, broad-based economic development programs, and entrepreneurship. Sarah, I am turning the floor over to you now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I'm so glad that we had DTE present and Kristen as well. I feel like the panel that was put together here today works so well. So I'm wrapping up the presentations today. And what I'm going to be talking about is a roadmap that we are releasing really soon called the Clean Energy Technology Adoption Roadmap. So before I get into what's there, I just want to give you a brief overview about the Economic Growth Institute, or EGI, as we are commonly known, and what we do here within the ecosystem. We provide technical assistance to companies and communities in multiple areas, all that in some way support equitable economic growth across the state of Michigan. Additionally, my side of the Institute is in doing research that is informative for companies and communities. And this report that we're releasing very soon is part of that research. So just as an overview of this report, before I jump in, I want to make sure to define how we use clean energy technology within this report. That's a really broad term, kind of like the term sustainability, and it can be interpreted in many different ways. So for our report, just for some context, as you guys are probably familiar, the state of Michigan has some pretty aggressive decarbonization goals. They recently released the My Healthy Climate Plan that really addressed some very specific next steps that they want to take to be able to achieve those decarbonization goals. And part of that was ensuring that they talked with industry and figured out, okay, where's industry at? What does industry need to be able to reach their own decarbonization goals? So our report is part of that. This project was funded by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And so what we're doing is creating this report for them and for the general ecosystem to understand kind of what the roadmap looks like for industry. So all that to say, clean energy technology, the way that we define that here is the installation of any hardware, software, or product that reduces energy consumption and increases energy efficiency in the manufacturing process compared to previous iterations. So again, the technology that's implemented may not be completely, net zero in their carbon emissions, but it's better than what it had done. So we are going to be doing or releasing this clean energy technology roadmap really soon. What I'm showing you here today, or what I'm calling our preliminary findings, it's that way because we're still putting the final report together, and we'll be releasing that with Eagle in early 2023. So how did we do this report? Just want to give you a brief overview of that. So we did 40 semi-structured interviews during 2022. And you can see in the graph here the types of organizations that we engaged with. You can see that we talked with OEMs, we talked with large tier suppliers, we also talked with SMMs, or small and medium-sized manufacturers, or you could think of them as the smaller tiers. We talked with utility companies, and then also consultants and ecosystem stakeholders throughout Michigan. So really we are trying to talk with a gamut of people who are starting to grapple with, some of these decarbonization issues. And we wanted to make sure to talk to all sizes of companies, because people are really in different places in what they're seeing and what they're trying to implement. So after we talked with them, we took all of this qualitative data and we did thematic coding and analysis, and you're going to see the results from that today. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight is when we were talking with these companies, we really focused on two areas. We focused on process efficiencies and fuel switching. So we're really looking at, the behind the meter, where DTE is focused on, the energy creation. We're really looking at how are companies actually using the energy. So with process efficiency, we were asking questions around how the company was really evaluating the production of their product and the energy used for that. And then fuel switching addressed if companies had on-site energy generation for high energy processes. Often these were very high heat processes. So our recommendations in our report really deal with this very narrow scope, very important, right? Because it really is part of the whole decarbonization plan. But this is something that we have to recognize that there's a lot of broader issues as well, such as the circular economy, recycling, so many different things. So this is just one piece of the overall puzzle. There are 3 different sections of the roadmap that I'm going to highlight for you today. The first is the clean energy technology adoption process. So I couldn't help but use a sprout. I just had to because of the area that we're in. And so we're going to kind of talk about what's supporting that sprout, so those components influencing technology adoption. And then we're also going to talk about the company adoption process. I'm going to highlight the categories of company adopters when we look at clean energy technology adoption. And finally, we'll have a SWOT that's available to kind of identify opportunities within this ecosystem. So let's jump in and kind of look at what are some of the components influencing technology adoption. What we did is we integrated our thematic commonalities emerging from the interviews with a validated model of technology adoption. This model has been widely used to explain how companies adopt new technologies, such as websites, e-commerce, ERP systems, all different things. And so we took that model and then integrated our participant responses within here. I'm going to show you a couple of these high-level ones today, giving you a quick executive summary because I could talk for a couple hours about this. So I'm just going to encourage you to get the final report if you want more detail about any of these. So with our first one is the environmental component. So 2 things I want to highlight about the environmental component that influences whether or not companies adopt these new technologies. One is customer requirements, right? So what are their customers requiring that they report, especially related to energy use, decarbonization, or carbon footprint? These customer requirements are still really varied in what's out there. There's a lot of language that's currently out there, but strict requirements are still very much in development, but that's definitely influencing what companies are or potentially are not doing right now. Another thing that really influences companies is incentives, of course, right? Trying to change that business case. And if there is an incentive available specific to a technology, that is a very helpful lever in changing whether or not a technology is adopted. The organizational component is also a really important factor influencing companies' adoption of technologies. So 2 things here that I want to highlight as well. The chain of command is very important. So what I mean by chain of command is who is the one that would be in charge of implementing some type of sustainability measure? Is this a person that is part of a sustainability committee? Is it just a side part of their job? Or is this a person that actually does have both funding and also authority to make some changes? These were really critical issues that emerged for our companies when they were talking about whether they were or were not implementing some new technologies. And then, of course, payback periods or the business case is really critical. It's interesting when I compare what we heard from our companies versus Kristen's data, because we actually found our payback periods were a little bit shorter, usually between 2 to 3 years. Some were even shorter, 12 to 18 months. And I think that's partly because we were talking with companies from the spectrum of they had some active decarbonization goals or energy efficiency goals to others who did not yet, honestly. They were starting to consider it, and so we kind of had a broader base of participants. And then the last component that, of course, is important is the technological component, which is when we're really talking about the technologies that are available in process efficiency and fuel switching technology that are companies are able to implement, and they already know that they're available and they can fit within their current process. So that's the overview of all these components influencing if technology adoption happens. Now let's talk about how technology adoption happens within a company. So first I want to highlight what's here on the left-hand side of the screen. So this initiation stage has 2 pieces, but this is when the company is starting to think about it, try to consider what's happening. And the first part of that initiation stage is agenda setting. So agenda setting is when the company identifies that there is some type of need or problem they need to solve. Either their energy costs are too high, or maybe there's a customer requirement. You know, they're starting to grapple with, ooh, this is a need. And it starts rising on the priority list because companies have so many different competing priorities to meet all at the same time. So agenda setting is if that need starts to rise to the level that it actually needs to be addressed. Then we see that companies go through a phase of matching. So matching is the stage where the solutions are starting to present themselves, or companies are assessing options for how to best address their sustainability goals or their energy efficiency goals or their fuel switching goals. Then we move into the implementation stage. So this is when a decision is actually made. And the first stage within that is this redefining, restructuring stage. And this is where companies are determining how clean energy technology can fit within their company. So they have an idea of like, they want to use this technology, but how do they pull it into their specific process that they have, both from the engineering side, but also from the personnel side. And this is where I want to highlight, like, there are unique processes for every single company. Plus, they have their own utility companies, which are different across the state of Michigan. So they're trying to figure out how to incorporate all of that in implementing this new technology. And there's always some level of customization that's needed here. Then within the clarifying stage is when the adoption of the new technology is starting to be discussed within the organization. There's a lot of questions arising about who's leading this process and where the responsibility lies. This is where you start seeing companies really start pulling on that organizational component that I talked about. And they're starting to try to figure out the implementation. I did want to share one quote from a participant that I thought was really representative of many companies. She said that as they were starting to, implement some new technologies, she said that even when we have leadership on board, we still find that the individuals that are actually implementing these projects on the ground are still very hesitant to pursue them and will strongly oppose them. So I think what this really highlights is, even within a company, if there are a few key people that are very interested in this, the implementation throughout the entire plant or the entire company can be a very difficult process. And then the final stage is routinizing. That's when the clean energy technology is embedded with the organization and broadly accepted by all departments. So I know this looks like a really beautiful chart. Most of you within companies are probably thinking, that's wonderful. That's not how it actually happens. There's so many gaps. And that's what this next slide is there to show is, I just have these little circles. We're like, gap, gap, gap. There's a lot of gaps right now in this process. It is a very challenging process. And I have more in the report on this, and I don't want to take up a lot of time today, but I did want to highlight just a couple of things. So where you see the one with agenda setting, one of the key gaps there is that requirements are still at a very early stage, whether that's customer requirements, government requirements. Everyone's still figuring out how to have requirements, especially for their suppliers within their scope 3 emissions, that can be tracked and that people can actually report, and how to standardize that. So it is still developing in what those requirements look like and potentially how to enforce those. So again, everyone knows there's kind of this general need. Everyone has there's many goals around decarbonization, but how to implement, still a big question. The other thing that I wanted to highlight here is number 2, that represents a lack of internal technical knowledge to be able to figure out what technologies are best. There are some great engineers doing some really wonderful processes out there for creating product, but integrating that potentially with some sustainability technologies, or knowing what those are and how that integrates with the process, there's definitely some workforce development needs there. Consultants are really fulfilling this role right now, or organizations like Kristen's at the IAC are fulfilling those as well, but there's definitely a gap there in what companies have at their disposal within their own workforce to be able to address these needs. So the last gap I wanted to highlight here is number 4 within the redefining and restructuring. Again, the chain of command and who is able to implement these things, or how it's integrated into the company, is still really a big struggle. I know some companies talked about, where do we even place sustainability efforts as the way that they talked about it, or decarbonization efforts? Who owns those? Who's going to actually run with that? And for companies that did not have a dedicated sustainability manager, it was really difficult to figure out kind of where to house that, because many of their employees are already working on a great number of things. So capacity was definitely an issue. So this provides an overview about kind of how clean energy technology adoption is done, I also wanted to discuss kind of where we're at right now. And so for that, I use a model called the Diffusion of Innovations. And so this is about the categories of company adopters and where people are at in adopting clean energy technology. So I want to address these different categories first, and then we can go into more detail. So the innovator category is talking about companies. These are usually large companies with significant financial resources, so they can test out some new technologies. They can also buffer a loss and accept the uncertainty of their investment and have the ability to kind of navigate the really complex technical challenges that come with a new technology. Then we move on to the slightly darker blue, the early adopter companies. These are ones that are really role models within their industry, and they're ready to adopt. They just need the technology to be a little farther along. Then we see we have early majority companies. So we're getting more and more companies, right? And they're going to spend a lot of time evaluating the technology first to make sure that the proof of concept is far enough along, the business case is strong enough, and they're still eager to adopt the technology. They just need to make sure that it does work well for their company. Then we see the late majority companies. These are companies that are adopting technologies because there's an economic requirement or the result of peer pressure. And laggards are the companies that are just really have limited resources and are only going to adopt if they absolutely have to, and there's a lot of resources to support them in that. So what does this mean when it relates to clean energy technology adoption? So what I want to do is overlay those components we talked about, the technology, the organization, and the environment, and how that right now is impacting where companies are at in their adoption of clean energy technology. So when we look at the innovators component, we can see right there from the technology standpoint, it's very, very complex. The environmental support, such as the types of incentives or the types of requirements, are very low at that point, but the organizational requirements are very, very high. As we move through this curve, we can see that the technology complexity starts to decrease, right? Because this technology is becoming less and less complex. There's more workforce, there's more consultants, all these people that can help support it, right? The environmental support starts to increase, right? Because we are starting to have more incentives as the technologies move through this curve, and you also have more requirements. And then finally, organizational requirements start to decrease as well. So, it's easier for people to start to implement this because there are more environmental supports, and then technology complexity is lower as well. So what we're going to be doing in the final report is kind of highlighting where are we at with fuel switching. Just as an aside, we're very early in that process, right? It's fuel switching technologies are still very, very early. And then also with process efficiencies, I think you can see even from Kristen's slide with process efficiencies, there's things that are being done, but we're still pretty early in the process. Even when she showed the slide of like, what have people implemented? LED lighting. That's an easy one because that's the same. That's standard pretty much across everyone. Everyone has lights. But the process efficiencies, because there's a level of customization, we're still kind of in the earlier stage because everyone's trying to figure out what works for me and my specific process. So I want to start wrapping up because I'm running out of time. Just know that we're going to have a SWOT available that's really for the state, and it's going to include recommendations on, what are the opportunities that we see to support companies in this clean energy technology adoption and help move them from one category to the next so we can have, get people in these early majority categories and start accelerating that adoption. So I'm saying that because I have an ask to all of you. We are in the final stages of creating the recommendations, and I would love to know, what assistance your company would like to have in clean energy technology adoption. So if you grab your phone and you scan this QR code, it'll just take you to a page where you can anonymously type in what you would like to see, and that can help inform our final recommendations. So I'll also put up my email as well in the next slide, but would greatly appreciate any feedback you have on, in general, any of this, as well as, what assistance would be most helpful for your company. And then to wrap up, again, our final report will be released in early 2023. You can sign up here. Sorry, I'm heavy on QR codes today. It's just easiest for me to put that up there for you so you don't have to remember my email. But my email is there as well if you would just like to email me. If you would like to have the report, we will post it on our website, but also happy to send it to you directly as well. So I will wrap up there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Love all the QR code, and certainly very much interested to see some of that, you know, if you're publishing those kind of results and input as to what companies are looking for, what type of help, so we can together kind of compare notes and help across the line. So all right, well, we are now, without any further ado, we're going to move on to the panel Q&A portion of the discussion today. So I will invite our panelists back on camera. And we have a series of questions we have prepared, but we'll certainly also look to weave if questions are coming through the chat for our panelist team. So we're going to start off. We heard a lot today across the panelists on decarbonization goals and efforts to take towards helping achieve those goals. So can you tell us how these goals can be balanced with whether it's getting the product or the right clean technology out the door?
So I can kick that one off because it's definitely a challenge we heard often within our interviews, right? We had one person tell us, you know, in the morning, they're all gung-ho about their goals, but then by the afternoon with their customer timelines and demands, they just kind of slipped away. So it really is a very real challenge right now. I do think this is something where I also would push, you know, some of the state regulations and different things, right? There's some environmental components that if those could change alongside some of the incentives to make this really more a business case versus just a sustainability or an ESG goal, but partly a business case, I think that would be very helpful. The companies who are also looking forward and starting to see the writing on the wall, I guess, as I would call it, and say some of these regulations are going to be pushed down, whether it's from their clients or the government, you know, and they want to be an early adopter so they're not caught or potentially lose business. That does seem to be a viable strategy as well to kind of balance it with kind of their get the product out the door needs.
Great. Anyone else would like to take this on, or we can move on to the next question? Which, building off kind of, you know, staying on the decarbonization theme, if one of you can share, I guess, some examples or of common types of energy improvements that could make the greatest decarbonization impact.
I'll say something. I think Sarah probably has insights on her end as well, but at least in the past year when we've been doing assessments, there's different categories of what I would consider biggest impact, right? There's the low-hanging fruit of things. So the LED lighting, where still, I would say maybe half or so of the companies we work with haven't fully implemented that. And low-cost things like improving the programs for identifying compressed air leaks, those kind of things, so low cost things. But then there's the opportunities that we see that are larger ticket items, more capital improvement projects that'll make the biggest difference on the decarbonization side. So replacing HVAC systems that are 20, 30, 40 years old, fairly common thing that we see is delayed changes, but if they could be made or could be improved, would make a substantial impact. Similarly, on the process side, as Sarah said, right, there's not a lot that's been done there, but I do think there's opportunities and there's more focus that needs to be made on that since it's such a big energy consuming load.
I agree, Kristen. I think, you know, the compressed air leaks do seem to be one that, especially for small, well, actually all size companies, they were like, oh my goodness, we found this, we found that. or, things like treasure hunts, or, just different things. Even knowing where their biggest energy draws are was a really big step, because there were some companies where they would talk about, we don't actually see the energy bill. That goes to the billing or wherever, and so there was a disconnect. So as those connections were made throughout the company, that was actually really helpful. And just knowledge of where are the biggest energy uses and what are our draws. So starting with that information is really important to understand for plant managers, where they can start to make some of the basic changes. So I think that's a great starting point for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and I think especially when I think about it through the EV charging lens, I think that is a great foundational starting point before you start to implement and put in charging, which will inherently increase the amount of energy that you're going to be using, making sure that you understand what your rate is that you're paying for the utility, what if you have demand components to it, if you don't, and then how that energy is going to be kind of spread out across all of your existing energy, as well as when it's going to be happening. So having that as a starting point, if we could have customers come to us that want to install EV chargers and already have that foundation, those conversations would be a lot easier to have, that's for sure.
Great. The next question, I guess we can start or continue with Brett. We've heard across the presentation, we're very much depending on, whichever business you're in or industry, very much intertwined with the utility. So with DTE starting to expand its utility role in the clean energy or clean technology such as the EV market. Brett, if you could explain a little bit more on why do you think we as a utility have a role and why we should be involved, and maybe Sarah and Kristen kind of build off on kind of the pieces that they're seeing and how the utility kind of helps with that role.
Yeah, I would love to hear what Sarah and Kristen have to say to this. I touched a little bit in my presentation, but the one that really sticks out to me is really the equity piece, and we try and make this a center component to what we're doing with our EV programs, and ensuring that we're really taking on that responsibility for the market to equitably bring everybody along in this transition. So I touched on a couple of our programs earlier. One that I didn't is that we actually just got approval to offer $1,500 rebates to income qualified customers to actually purchase an electric vehicle. It's the first time that we've ever had a rebate for an EV and not the EV charger. And since the state of Michigan doesn't have any sort of rebate for the purchase of an EV today, we thought it was an important component to add in that piece of it. We also have been working with companies like Lyft and Uber to bring the transportation network company fleet into our territory and help those get electrified, because we found that especially through Lyft, it was somewhere around 2/3 of the drivers and 2/3 of the rides either start or end in an area that would be considered a disadvantaged community. So we think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done there, and we think that the utility is really uniquely suited to do that work.
So I guess I have one comment. I mean, it's more broad, I guess, about what I heard from companies about the role of the utility, and it's really huge, right? So two things. One is, as companies were trying to electrify processes that potentially were, natural gas or another source, that makes the assumption that the grid is cleaner. So essentially, the way that DTE is producing the energy is clean, however we want to define that. So there's really critical work. And I know, Brett, you highlighted like the decommissioning of some coal plants and renewable energies that are starting to come in. So definitely a really critical part. Another thing that was really interesting is how important the incentives are that you guys provide. So It's just one of those things that honestly, some companies, if there's not some type of incentive, like the value of that project, the matching stage, like it's just like it keeps going down. So, the incentives are important, and as well as the education piece of like, hey, you can do compressed air, and we're going to support that, and what that looks like. So I know that that's some of the things we heard, not specific to the EV charging, but to what utility companies have a really big role to play. That's why I put all the caveats in the beginning of my report of this is one piece of the puzzle, because it really is going to take everybody moving together at the same time. So, Kristen, other thoughts? Did I say too much?
No, I don't have too much else. I would say, a similar kind of experience in terms of what I've heard. I will appreciate the incentive programs, rebate programs, anything that can help support, efforts in that area.
Yeah, definitely anything, we can do now, right, before widespread adoption, because at some point in the future, whether it's, EVs or whatever that technology, there's not going to be much of any other options around, but, trying to see how effectively and, without interrupting operations, because businesses, at the end of the day, they still need to be doing what they do best, which is run their business. Okay, so this next question, I guess, so tying into whether maybe sharing for the audience today some best practices of clean energy technology adoption, or even highlighting some common types of energy improvement opportunities that you might have seen or identified that are more so easy to adopt, low cost, and the low hanging fruit, so to say. Like, how do you start?
I guess I can add a little bit. I'd say it's somewhat similar to the previous discussion we had. So the things like the low cost or fairly easy things like lighting, like compressed air leaks, things that don't take a lot of time or not a lot of cost, and something that can be, the technology is there to be able to implement it. Things that have greater impacts, things that we see are more like heat recovery, for example. So recovery of waste heat that's otherwise being, creating warmer temperatures inside the plant or not being used in some way. I'd say that the biggest energy saving potential generally is in the heat recovery side of it, but it has to be the right setup to be able to effectively use that.
I kind of like to answer the question from two different perspectives, depending on somebody's place within a company. So, if somebody is a leader within the company, I think really recognizing that this needs to be a cross-cutting effort. You cannot just kind of put it in one department or one person and expect it to move forward. That person feels very disempowered and has a very hard time implementing these things, because it really is something that needs to be multiple departments coming together to support this. So just recognizing that at the offset, like there needs to be a lot of support for this effort across all departments. The other thing I want to highlight is if somebody is one of those sustainability managers or just has the task, like they're the only ones within the company doing that, know that there is a network, like a broader network of these individuals. Like last month, no, it was 2 months ago, in October, like Eagle held a conference called MishCon, so the Michigan Sustainability Conference, where a lot of people came together from different companies and started talking about what they're doing. This is a really important support network for companies to start to get networked with. Because if your company isn't doing stuff in general and you're the one trying to move it forward, if you network with other like-minded individuals at other companies, not to talk about IP or anything like that, just, in general, struggles and how you overcome those, that's a really great way to start learning from each other and how to move things forward. So that's kind of based on like this social change type model that University of Michigan, like Jerry Davis kind of highlights, but that's how in general, like these changes can happen when it's not, just one company doing one thing, it's companies networking with each other to start learning from each other. So highly encourage that too.
And I would just mention one more time the My Green Power program from DTE. I think as as you look at putting solar on your home or solar on your building, along with storage, it's expensive on an individual basis or on a small scale basis. Where we think that when you can do that at a utility scale and have them be very large renewable assets and storage assets, that it really brings that cost, per kilowatt hour, or however you want to view it, down pretty substantially. And through that program, you essentially can get 100% renewable energy just with a pretty minimal fee added to your monthly bill. And that goes towards helping DTE deploy even more renewable assets onto the grid. So I just want to, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug that into this section one more time, just to encourage people to go take a look at that.
Great, thanks for that plug, Brett. I know we had a question earlier on, whether we had there are rebates available for the solar programs, and so certainly checking out the MI Green Power that we have, it's one way to kind of help understand and kind of how to make that move while still benefiting what's available out there. So I know, so we touched on, so certainly, Sarah mentioned, different, whether it's different conferences, webinars, participating, brainstorming with the industry, sharing lessons learned. But if you can touch on maybe additionally what specific resources are available to maybe assist companies to take that first step, right? How do I, okay, it's great. There's a lot of kind of information out there, but what do I actually do to start, doing some action items towards clean energy technology adoption?
Can I plug Kristen's program? So if you're small enough, contact Kristen. If not, she'll connect you with better plans. So
yeah, that was going to be my answer as well. And I'd say to, at least on the Department of Energy side, and I can't speak to all the other programs, but on the Department of Energy side, the IAC program is available, CHP TAP for supporting CHP type efforts. Technology assistance in general, there's several different programs available to support this. And if one of us isn't the right person to talk to, we'll refer you to somebody else. So if it's a smaller manufacturer, it'd generally be our program. If it's a larger manufacturer, be Better Plants. If it's a commercial building, be Better Buildings. So there's something available, and they generally have good recommendations and resources as well nationally. Maybe others of you can speak locally if they're specific things, but those would be some of the things on our end.
And then, Kristen, the one other thing was thinking about the ACEEE conference this summer. Do you think that?
Sure.
So I'll put that in the chat. This is a conference coming up this summer. It's focused on decarbonization and how industry can turn goals into actionable plans. So just Kristen and I are serving on the workforce development panel there. So would like to highlight that as well. I know, and really there is a lot starting to go on in this space. So Brett, I'm sure you
Detroit, right?
Yes, this is in Detroit this year. So that is very applicable and easy to attend.
Great. Well, yeah, I'll have to check that out too. I would say I would point people to a couple of things. One, if you have a fleet and you're looking to electrify your fleet, we have an advisory services team that will help you. We will take your fleet information and what vehicles you have and what their routes look like, and help you come up with a plan to electrify and what charging you'll need, what vehicles are available to replace the current diesel or gasoline vehicles that you have. So that information, as well as a ton of other info on just electrification in general, is all over the DTE website. We're trying to provide as many resources as possible to help people learn about this and provide links to different teams that manage different email inboxes at the company that are more subject matter experts that can help answer specific questions.
the next question, so with all this change that's coming, with all these efforts that are going in the space, whether it's decarbonization or bringing equitable access, a question that naturally comes to mind is also thinking about what do we do now to address some of the challenges that we've already kind of identified, or barriers in the energy workforce development. How do we get ready, right, for that future state, but also continue to function, the daily, or what the current state is, as we make a safe and kind of reliable transition to a more sustainable one.
Yeah,
Right.
oh, go ahead, Kristen. You can.
No, you go. I'll go after. Go ahead.
I would say one of the things that we're really focused on is identifying where this transition is happening now, and then where it's going to happen next, and kind of trying to map that out and forecast more really granular of instead of looking at the entire grid and saying, all right, we need to upgrade everything because this electrification is coming, and we need to spend all of these dollars. It's taking really focused approaches of where do these upgrades need to happen, and at what time. And we know that the first places that it's going to happen are what we call at the grid edge, right? It's at the transformer that's feeding 4 homes in a residential neighborhood because 2 people got an EV or someone converted to an electric heat pump. So really trying to hone in on the data that we have through the electric meters that are out there, and then leaning on some industry experts, as well as some other states that have already gone through this transition a little bit faster, to understand kind of how this transition happens and across different areas of the territory.
I'll touch a little bit on the workforce side. I think, we heard a lot so far from talking to various people about what the challenges are. And so if we pinpoint some of those specific challenges, things like collaboration, I think, are the main, if there's a way that we can better support bringing different stakeholders to get together to get all those viewpoints in the same room. So for example, something that we heard at the national level is that there's a lot of concurrent efforts to do essentially the same thing, but maybe not as much coordination as could be happening to best use the resources that are available to support workforce development, workforce training at the state and the national level. So, things like the meeting that we'll have next summer for ACEEE, or anything, right? The MESCON conference that we just had, anything to help bring people together to identify where people can collaborate at the different levels. So K through 12, college or community college, and then workforce development programs outside of that.
Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, all touched upon. Totally agree.
Yeah, and so building off, kind of the question that we received through the chat, and kind of specifically knowing what programs or initiatives can vocational institutions and community college really play, as we're seeing more and more of these kind of topics been brought forward, and really knowing or guiding them, well, what can you do right now to take some action?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So the question is, what can we do on the community college side?
Yeah, what role or what programs or initiatives can, the community colleges and the universities kind of, jump in and provide that support?
I can speak briefly to the infrastructure bill that's coming out. So there will be just quite a bit of additional funding to support community colleges and trade schools in the energy efficiency training space through the infrastructure bill. So that notice of intent just came out this week. So there'll be more information on that to help support funding at the national level to expand those programs. And then again, like what I said before, any way that we can collaborate or support, across different organizations, including the community colleges, so that there's different pathways to support workforce development. I think that's where we need to be having those conversations.
And on the vocational institutions, I tell people all the time that one of the things that does keep me up at night is the I think impending in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of electricians are probably going to be retiring, and there are not enough electricians to actually replace them, and it could be a pretty big piece of the market that needs to be addressed, and there's going to be a lot of demand for those trades out in the market, and it's probably a shift away from a couple of decades ago when it was, you didn't maybe want to take the shop class in high school. Now I wish all the shop classes were back in high school, so that kids were still doing that. So if that is in your curriculum or in your thought, it will be something that's just going to continue to be in high demand as we go.
Yeah, the workforce development component, I think, like MAGMA talks about often, is just so critical. Huge need still. Some stuff happening, more needs to happen. So maybe I'd like to ask Michelle that question too eventually, like, what does MAGMA think, and the executives around the table there and what they're thinking. So yeah.
Yeah, and it looks like, oh, I was just going to note that we did get a volunteer. It looks like someone we have, an organization wants to be in the EV training provider list. So the synergy is already happening. Look at the things we're doing this Friday morning.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And really, employer-led collaboratives like the EV Jobs Academy led by MAGMA are really open to all industry stakeholder partners, training providers. So anything that can be leveraged. We've gone through a lot of asset mapping, prepared curriculum development lists, and we're starting out the new year by really scaling a lot of high demand occupations that meet the occupation skills needs of our employers, as we have learned about throughout the year this year. We've had a lot of EV Jobs Academy meetings, and we've been really working through very strategically through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Talent Pipeline Management methodology to first gain that employer voice to be able to scale up programs that really meets industry needs, because we have had the instances whereby we've engaged with our colleges have engaged with employers, and a lot of employment after completions, training completion didn't result in employment. And it's like, okay, where's the disconnect here? And only to find out that, certain needs were not met. And so we want to really ensure that the certification training programs that get scaled really meets industry needs to the point of, really completing that whole longitudinal process that leads right to employment. So all providers welcome. We have a lot of employers at the table. And there's a lot more support coming from the state of Michigan for training reimbursement funds that will be in place starting with the new year. So very exciting. State of Michigan's really making a big investment here. Thank you.
Great. Well, that is all I had from kind of the prepared questions and kind of what I'm seeing coming through the chat. So I know we are at time for the 30 minutes of the Q&A portion. Are we, I am not sure, Michelle, are we releasing back or?
No, this is it. Really, I think this has been I found very informative. All of the speakers addressed a lot of my questions that I've had since we started the EV Jobs Academy, employer-led collaborative initiative. So thank you so much. This is a lot of the foundational information behind the scenes, all the important work that you're doing through utility companies, U of M, Michigan State University on those industrial assessments that really play into the whole clean energy effort. So thank you for sharing all the important work that you're doing every day. That is really behind the scenes that we really haven't really discussed in the EV Jobs Academy meetings. So this really plays into and helps shape strategies for us going forward. And if there are no other questions, I think we can wrap things up and wish everybody happy holidays. Feel welcome to ask any other final questions if you have them. Just turn on your microphone and ask away. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. But this is your opportunity. We have some great experts here at the table today. Well, I think we're good. I think that just means that all of you have done a great job in delivering your presentations. I think you've answered or responded to a lot of the questions I have, and it sounds like you did well with everyone that attended. So thank you all for your attendance. Thank you. Special thanks to our moderator and speakers. And again, have a safe and happy holiday season, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.